The wagon should have arrived 3 days ago. When Caleb Rourke found the wreckage at Dry Creek Crossing, he knew death had visited this place. Splintered wood, scattered belongings, and somewhere in that hell of dust and broken dreams, a woman who'd traveled 1,500 miles to marry him lay dying beneath the Wyoming sun. He had 48 hours, maybe less, to find her before the desert claimed what the crash hadn't finished. This is the story of a mail-order bride who refused to surrender, and the cowboy who tracked her through impossible odds. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat that summer of 1883 didn't just beat down on Red Hollow, Wyoming. It punished. It baked the earth until cracks spiderwebbed across the main street like broken pottery. It withered the sparse grass on the surrounding hills to the color of old rope. It made men move slowly, deliberately, conserving every ounce of moisture their bodies held. And it made Caleb Rourke stand at the depot platform every morning at dawn, scanning the eastern horizon for dust clouds that never came. His daughter Ruby stood beside him most mornings, her small hand tucked into his calloused palm. She was 6 years old, with hair the color of prairie wheat and eyes that saw too much for someone so young. She'd learned about loss early. Her mother, Caleb's wife Sarah, had died bringing her into this harsh world, leaving Caleb to raise a daughter alone in a land that showed mercy to neither man nor child. "Pa," Ruby said on the morning of the 4th day, tugging his sleeve. Maybe the lady changed her mind. Caleb's jaw tightened. He folded and unfolded the letter in his pocket. The paper had gone soft from constant handling, the ink fading but still legible. Mara Ellington, 24 years old, from St. Louis, a schoolteacher's daughter who'd answered his advertisement in the matrimonial news with words that had struck something deep in his chest he'd thought long dead. "Dear Mr. Rourke," she'd written in her careful, educated script, "I am writing not because I seek adventure or romance, but because I seek purpose. You mention in your advertisement that you have a young daughter who needs a mother's care. I have no children of my own, but I have taught them for 3 years at Miss Pemberton's School for Girls. I know their hearts, I know their hurts, and I know that love, real love, is built not in moments of passion, but in the quiet dailiness of showing up, day after day, choosing to care. If you'll have me, I'll come to Wyoming. I'll be a mother to Ruby. And I'll be a faithful wife to you. I ask for nothing but honesty and a chance to build something lasting." Caleb had read that letter 20 times before he'd written back, 30 times before he'd sent the money for her passage. And every night since, lying in his narrow bed in the ranch house he'd built with his own hands, he'd wondered if he was a fool. Men like him, rough, weathered, shaped by wind and work, didn't get second chances. They didn't get women like Mara Ellington, with her thoughtful words and obvious education, willing to step off a train into the brutal reality of frontier life. But she'd written again. And again. Her letters had come monthly, then twice a month, then weekly as the departure date approached. She'd told him about her favorite books, Austen and Dickens, though she confessed a weakness for dime novels she probably shouldn't admit to. She'd asked careful questions about Ruby's temperament, what she liked to eat, whether she was shy or bold. She'd even asked about the ranch, how many head of cattle, what the winters were like, whether the house had glass windows or just shutters. Caleb had answered every question with the same painful honesty. 50 head of cattle, give or take. Winters that could kill a man who got careless. 2 glass windows in the whole house, both in Ruby's room, because he'd wanted her to see the sunrise. The truth was all he had to offer, and if it wasn't enough, better she know now than after she'd made the journey. But she'd written back, "Glass windows for a child's sunrise. That tells me everything I need to know about your heart, Mr. Rourke." That letter had made him believe just for a moment that maybe the universe wasn't entirely cruel. Now, standing on the depot platform with Ruby's small hand in his and the sun climbing toward another day of merciless heat, Caleb felt belief crumbling like the parched earth beneath his boots. "She didn't change her mind, baby girl," Caleb said quietly. "The coach is late, that's all." But 4 days late wasn't late. 4 days late was disaster. The depot manager, a grizzled man named Hoskins with tobacco-stained whiskers and rheumy eyes, came out of his office wiping sweat from his forehead with a gray handkerchief. "Caleb, he said, his voice carrying the weight of bad news. You should head home. The midday stage ain't coming either. I just got word. Word from where? Telegraph from Buffalo Creek. Line trouble east of there. No coaches getting through until they clear whatever's blocking the road. Caleb's gut twisted. What kind of trouble? Hoskins shrugged. Could be anything. Rock slide, flash flood. Indians, though, that ain't likely anymore. He paused, reading something in Caleb's expression. Your bride coming in on one of those coaches? Was supposed to be here Monday. Today's Friday, son. I know what day it is. Hoskins studied him a moment longer, then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. I'm sure she's fine. Probably held up at a way station somewhere, playing cards and eating tinned peaches until the road clears. Caleb didn't answer. He turned to Ruby, who was staring up at him with those knowing eyes. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you home. They walked the half-mile to where he'd tied his horse, a big bay gelding named Buck. Caleb lifted Ruby into the saddle and swung up behind her, one arm around her narrow shoulders. The town of Red Hollow sprawled behind them, if you could call it a town. 2 saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, the depot, and maybe 30 buildings total, most of them leaning slightly as if tired of fighting the wind. Caleb's ranch lay 7 miles northeast, where Cottonwood Creek cut through a small valley that stayed green even in drought years. It wasn't much. A main house, a barn, a bunkhouse for the 2 ranch hands he employed seasonally, and corrals that always needed mending. But it was his. He'd claimed the land through the Homestead Act, broken his back proving it up, built every structure with timber he'd hauled himself from the Medicine Bow Mountains 40 miles south. He'd done it all for Ruby, and now, maybe, for Mara, if she was still alive to see it. That evening, after Ruby had gone to bed, Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun bleed out across the western horizon. The temperature had finally dropped below brutal, and a faint breeze carried the smell of sage and distance. Inside the house, Ruby's breathing had fallen into the deep rhythm of sleep. She'd been quiet all afternoon, sensing his worry, trying not to add to it with questions she was too young to ask, but old enough to feel. Caleb pulled out Mara's last letter, the one that had arrived 2 weeks before her departure. Dear Caleb, I hope by now I can call you that rather than Mr. Rourke. I leave for Wyoming in 6 days. My trunk is packed. My affairs in St. Louis are settled. I find myself nervous in a way I haven't been since childhood, but it's a good nervousness, the kind that comes before something important begins. I've been thinking about what it means to choose a life rather than simply accept the one given to you. My father was a kind man, but he believed a woman's path was narrow: teacher, wife, mother, in that order, within the boundaries of proper society. I loved teaching, but I felt myself disappearing into other people's expectations. Your letters have shown me that perhaps in Wyoming, in the wild spaces where society's grip is looser, a woman might build a life on her own terms. I'm bringing books for Ruby, Treasure Island and Alice in Wonderland, and I'm bringing hope for all of us. See you soon, Caleb. We begin our new story together on June 15th. Yours with anticipation, Mara. June 15th had come and gone. It was now June 19th. Something was wrong. Caleb felt it in his bones the way he felt approaching weather, a pressure in the air, a tightness in his chest that preceded storms. He was still sitting there, letter in hand, when he heard the horse coming hard from the direction of town. He stood, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle just inside the door, but he recognized the rider before the man reached the porch. Sam Weaver, one of the younger ranchers who ran cattle 10 miles west. Caleb! Sam pulled his horse up in a spray of dirt, the animal lathered and heaving. You need to get to town, now! Caleb's heart kicked against his ribs. Why? Stage driver just rode in. Came from Dry Creek Crossing. There's been an accident. Bad one. The world seemed to tilt slightly. How bad? Wagon tipped. Driver said... Sam hesitated, his young face troubled. Said he got thrown clear, but there was passengers. A couple headed to Buffalo Creek, and a woman traveling alone. Young woman, he said, from back east. Caleb didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was gripping Sam's stirrup so hard his knuckles had gone white. Is she alive? Driver don't know. He left to get help. That was 3 days ago, Caleb. He's been walking since. Just made it to Red Hollow an hour past. 3 days. In this heat. Trapped at Dry Creek Crossing, which was 20 miles of nothing between 2 more miles of nothing. Ruby, Caleb said, his mind racing. Mary's already on her way to sit with her, Sam said. Mary was Sam's wife, a capable woman who Ruby knew well. I figured you'd need to ride out tonight. Caleb looked back at the house, at the window of Ruby's room where a single lamp burned low. He thought about waking her, explaining. But what would he say? I have to go find a woman you've never met, who might already be dead, who might never have been real to begin with? No. He'd go. He'd find Mara or find her body. And then he'd come home and tell Ruby the truth, whatever that truth turned out to be. Tell Mary I'm grateful, Caleb said. Tell her I'll be back as soon as I can. You want company? I can… No, you've got your own stock to worry about. I'll manage. Sam nodded, recognizing the tone that said the discussion was over. Good luck, Caleb. I hope you find her breathing. So do I. Within 20 minutes, Caleb had saddled Buck, filled his canteens, packed jerky and hardtack, grabbed rope, a spare rifle, and a medical kit his wife Sarah had assembled years ago. The kit was probably useless. Sarah had known herbs and remedies, things Caleb had never fully understood, but he took it anyway. Hope was better than nothing. He rode back to town in the dark, navigating by starlight and memory. Red Hollow was quiet when he arrived, just a few lights burning in the saloons. He found the stage driver at the doctor's office, a sunburnt wreck of a man named Pete Corman, who Caleb knew slightly. Pete was sitting on the examination table while Doc Harrison treated his blistered feet and sunburned face. Rourke, Pete said when Caleb entered. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. Weaver said you'd come. Tell me exactly where, Caleb said without preamble, and tell me what you saw. Pete winced as Doc Harrison applied salve to his cracked lips. Dry Creek Crossing. You know it? I know it. Road drops down into the creek bed there, nothing but rocks and sand. We were coming through just after dawn, trying to beat the worst heat, but the wheels hit a washout I didn't see. Back axle snapped. Wagon went over sideways. Pete closed his eyes, remembering. Happened so fast. I got thrown 20 feet, landed in sand, lucky as hell. When I got my breath back and looked around, the couple, the Hendersons, they were shook up but walking. Cuts and bruises, nothing serious, but the woman… Mara, Caleb said. Her name is Mara Ellington. Pete nodded slowly. She was trapped. One of the roof beams came down on her when the wagon tipped. Pinned her legs. The Hendersons and I tried to lift it, but the whole damn wagon was on top of her. We couldn't shift it. She was conscious then, talking, real calm, considering. She said… Pete's voice caught. She said to tell Caleb Rourke she was sorry she was going to be late. Caleb's throat closed. He couldn't speak. I tried to stay, Pete continued. Swear to God I did, but the Hendersons needed water, needed to get moving or they'd die right there. And Miss Ellington, she told me to go, said she'd wait, said she'd be fine. He looked at Caleb with eyes full of guilt and exhaustion. I left her a canteen. That's all I could do. I told her I'd send help. That was 3 days ago. She could still be alive, Doc Harrison said quietly. If she's in shade, if she's been careful with the water… 3 days, Pete interrupted. In this heat, with her legs crushed. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Rourke. I'm so damn sorry. Caleb turned and walked out of the office before he did something he'd regret. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, focused rage at the universe's casual cruelty. He'd lost Sarah. He'd raised Ruby alone, watching her grow up without a mother, carrying that guilt like stones in his pockets. And now, when he'd finally allowed himself to hope for something better, the world had reached out and crushed it. Unless she was alive. Unless, by some miracle, Mara Ellington had held on. He mounted Buck and turned the horse east, toward Dry Creek Crossing, toward whatever waited there in the dark. The ride took 4 hours, navigating rough terrain in starlight. Caleb pushed Buck hard but not recklessly. A lame horse out here was a death sentence. The landscape around him was familiar in the general sense, but alien in specifics, all shadows and shapes that could be anything. Twice he startled antelope from their resting places. Once a coyote paced him for half a mile before veering off into the sage. Caleb's mind wouldn't settle. It kept circling back to Mara's letters, to the quiet intelligence in her words, the careful way she'd built trust between them, one paragraph at a time. She'd told him about losing her mother to typhoid when she was 14, about stepping into that role for her younger sister, essentially raising the girl while their father retreated into books and grief, about choosing teaching not because it was expected, but because children's minds were gloriously unjaded, still capable of wonder. "Sometimes I think wonder is what keeps us human," she'd written. "The moment we stop being amazed by sunrises, or moved by a child's laugh, or curious about what lies beyond the next hill, that's when we become just machines for surviving. I don't want to just survive, Caleb. I want to live with intention, with purpose, with people I choose and who choose me back." Those words had gutted him in the best way, because that's exactly what he wanted for Ruby. Not just survival, but a life full of wonder and intention and choice. And now Mara might be dead in the desert, having never even met the child she'd promised to mother. Dawn was breaking, washing the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, when Caleb spotted the wreckage. Dry Creek Crossing was well named. The creek bed was nothing but stones and sand this time of year, a 30-foot-wide scar cutting through low hills. The stage wagon lay on its side like a broken toy, canvas torn, wheels jutting at wrong angles. Caleb's heart hammered as he rode closer. He couldn't see anyone moving. No sound but wind and the creak of Buck's saddle. "Mara." His voice cracked the silence like a gunshot. "Mara Ellington." Nothing. He dismounted 20 feet from the wreck, ground-tying Buck, and approached on foot. The sun was rising fast now, temperature already climbing. He could see personal belongings scattered across the sand. A woman's traveling case burst open, dresses tangled with men's shirts, a child's toy, a wooden horse lying on its side. The Hendersons must have had a kid. "Mara!" He circled the wagon, looking for... what? A body? A miracle? Then he saw the canteen. Pete's canteen, recognizable by the dent in one side. It lay 15 feet from the wagon, empty, tipped on its side in the sand. And beyond it, drag marks. Someone had crawled away from the wreck. Caleb's pulse kicked into overdrive. He followed the marks, reading the story they told. Someone had pulled themselves along using their arms, legs dragging. The marks were 3 days old, partially blown over by wind, but still visible. They led away from the wreck, toward a rocky outcropping maybe 200 yards distant. He ran, no longer caring about conserving energy or water. He ran through sand that grabbed at his boots, over rocks that turned under his weight, following those terrible drag marks that spoke of determination and agony in equal measure. "Mara! Mara, can you hear me?" Near the rocks, he found a strip of blue cloth caught on a thorn bush. The fabric was quality, well made, the kind a woman from St. Louis might wear for traveling. The drag marks continued around the rocks, and Caleb's lungs burned as he scrambled after them. On the far side, sheltered slightly from the direct sun, he found the fallen beam from the wagon. Someone had somehow managed to drag it here, though God only knew how, and trapped beneath it, partially in shadow, lay a woman's form. Caleb fell to his knees beside her. "Mara, Mara, it's Caleb." I'm here." She didn't move. Her face was turned away from him, dark hair matted with sand and sweat. He could see her dress was torn, her legs bent at angles that made him sick to look at. Her skin was burned by the sun, lips cracked and bleeding. With shaking hands, he touched her throat, feeling for a pulse. And there it was. Thready, barely there, but present. She was alive. "Thank God," Caleb breathed. "Thank God you're alive." He assessed the situation with the practical part of his brain that had kept him alive on this frontier for 15 years. The beam across her legs wasn't actually pinning her anymore. She'd managed to work most of herself free, probably over hours or days. But her legs were definitely broken, both of them, from the look of it. She'd somehow dragged herself in this beam 200 yards from the wagon to this meager shade, and then she'd collapsed. The strength that must have taken. The sheer will. Caleb lifted the beam off her carefully, then gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, all bones and determination. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the terrible heat of fever radiating from her skin. "I've got you," he whispered, standing carefully with her in his arms. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." Just hold on a little longer." She made no sound, didn't open her eyes, but her breathing changed slightly, just a hitch that might have been awareness. Caleb carried her back to Buck, moving as quickly as he dared. The horse shied slightly at the strange burden, but steadied when Caleb spoke to him. Getting her into the saddle was awkward and probably painful. He heard her make a small sound, the first noise she'd made, but he managed it, then swung up behind her, holding her against his chest. "Where's the nearest shelter?" he asked aloud, thinking. Not Red Hollow. That was 4 hours back, and she needed help now. The Henderson place was 20 miles south, but he didn't know the Hendersons well enough to risk it. Then he remembered. The old trapper's cabin at Willow Springs, 3 miles northwest. It had been abandoned for years, but it had walls and a roof and a well that probably still held water. It would have to do. He turned Buck toward Willow Springs and touched his heels to the horse's flanks. "Come on, boy, fast as you can without jostling her." Buck seemed to understand. He moved into a smooth, ground-eating lope that covered distance without jarring. Caleb held Mara against him, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other steadying her broken legs as much as possible. He could feel her heart beating against his chest, feel the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. "Stay with me," he murmured into her hair. "We're almost there. Just stay with me, Mara. I didn't ride 20 miles to lose you now." The cabin appeared through the heat shimmer like a mirage, weathered wood, sagging slightly but intact. Caleb had been here once, years ago, checking on it as part of a sweep for rustlers. The trapper who'd built it, a Frenchman named Levesque, had died or moved on, and the place stood empty. Caleb dismounted carefully, lifted Mara down, and kicked open the cabin door. Inside was a single room, maybe 12 by 12, with a stone fireplace, a rough table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame with no mattress. Dust thick on everything. But the roof was solid, and when Caleb tested the pump at the sink, water coughed out after a few strokes. Rusty at first, then clear. Thank God. He laid Mara on the bed frame, wishing desperately for blankets or a mattress or anything soft. Her fever was raging now, her skin hot enough to burn. He knew heat stroke when he saw it. He'd lost ranch hands to it, seen strong men reduced to confusion and convulsions in hours. Water. She needed water immediately. Caleb pumped frantically, filling a tin cup he found hanging on the wall. He knelt beside her, lifted her head gently, and touched the cup to her lips. "Mara. Mara, you need to drink. Just a little. Come on." Her lips moved slightly. He tilted the cup, letting water trickle into her mouth. Most of it ran down her chin, but she swallowed once, twice. He kept at it, patient, letting her take sips at her own pace. After what felt like hours but was probably 5 minutes, she'd managed maybe a quarter cup. It was a start. He set the cup aside and began working on her injuries. Her dress was ruined, torn and filthy, but he left it for now. Modesty mattered less than survival, but he'd preserve what he could. Her legs were definitely broken, both of them below the knee. The left one was worse, bone visible through torn skin. He'd need to set them properly, but first he had to get her fever down. Caleb stripped off his shirt, soaked it in cold water from the pump, and began bathing her face, her neck, her arms. The water evaporated almost instantly in the heat, but he kept at it, pump and ring, over and over. Her skin was so hot it felt almost inhuman. "Come on," he muttered. "Fight. I know you can fight. You dragged yourself 200 yards with broken legs. You can fight this." Hours passed. The sun climbed to its zenith, turning the cabin into an oven despite the shade. Caleb worked methodically, cool her skin, give her water, check her breathing, repeat. He found dried herbs hanging from the rafters, leftovers from Levesque's time. Some of them he recognized. Willow bark. Sarah had used that for pain and fever. He boiled water in a pot he found, brewed a bitter tea, managed to get some of it down Mara's throat. By mid-afternoon, her fever had broken slightly. Not much, but enough that Caleb felt a small crack in the wall of his fear. "That's it," he whispered. "Come back. Come back to us, Mara." And then, as the sun began its descent toward evening, her eyes opened. They were gray, stormy gray like winter sky, and they focused on him with an intensity that nearly stopped his heart. "Caleb?" Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and broken. He leaned closer. I'm here. You're safe. I found you. Ruby? Just the one word, but it carried everything. Question, concern, fear. She's fine. She's at home with a neighbor. She's been worried about you. Mara's eyes closed again, but this time it looked more like relief than unconsciousness. Late, she whispered. Sorry. I'm late. Caleb felt something break open in his chest. This woman, half dead from heat stroke and broken bones, was apologizing for being late to her own wedding. You're right on time, he said softly. Right exactly on time. Her lips curved in the barest hint of a smile. Then she slipped back into fever sleep, but it was different now, more natural, less frighteningly deep. Caleb sat back on his heels, suddenly aware that his own body was shaking with exhaustion and relief. He'd been operating on pure will for hours, and now that will was crumbling, leaving him wrung out and hollow. But she was alive. Against all odds, against logic and probability, and the brutal mathematics of desert survival, Mara Ellington was alive. As night fell and the temperature finally dropped to something bearable, Caleb made a fire in the fireplace and boiled more water. He managed to get Mara to drink a little broth he made from beef jerky and some wild onions he found growing near the well. She didn't wake fully, but she swallowed when he coaxed her, and that was enough. He sat beside the bed, watching her breathe, occasionally checking her pulse and temperature. The fever was still there but seemed to be losing its grip. Her body was beginning to fight back. Around midnight, she stirred again. This time her eyes opened fully, and there was consciousness behind them, pain and confusion, but also awareness. Where? She asked. Old Trapper's cabin, about 3 miles from where I found you. Do you remember the accident? She nodded slightly. Wagon, tipped, driver left. Said, help was coming. I'm sorry it took 3 days, I didn't know. You came. Her eyes fixed on his face with an expression he couldn't quite read. You found me. Of course I did. The words came out rougher than he intended. You're going to be my wife. I wasn't going to leave you out there. Something shifted in her expression. Legs? He wouldn't lie to her. Broken. Both of them. But I've set broken bones before. Once we get you strong enough, I'll splint them properly. You'll walk again. It'll take time, but you'll walk. She processed this silently for a long moment. Then, Ruby, tell me about Ruby. So Caleb talked. He told her about Ruby's fascination with birds, how she could identify every species that nested near the ranch. He told her about Ruby's habit of making up songs while she did chores, nonsense rhymes that made Caleb laugh despite himself. He told her how Ruby slept with an old rag doll Sarah had made, how she was brave about spiders but terrified of thunder, how she asked questions constantly about everything. Mara listened, her eyes never leaving his face. And gradually, as he talked, some of the pain lines around her eyes eased. She sounds wonderful, Mara whispered when he finished. She is, and she's going to love you. You don't know that. I know you dragged yourself 200 yards with broken legs because you're too stubborn to die before meeting her. That's all I need to know. Mara's eyes glistened with tears. I'm not what you expected. No dowry, no family, nothing to offer. Caleb leaned closer, his voice firm. Listen to me. I didn't advertise for a mail-order bride because I wanted money or connections. I did it because Ruby needs a mother, and I need a partner. Someone who'll choose this life. Choose us. You already did that, Mara. You got on a train in St. Louis and traveled 1,500 miles into the unknown. You survived a wagon crash that should have killed you. You fought through 3 days in hell because you'd given your word. That's what you bring to this marriage, and that's enough, more than enough. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm scared. Of what? That I won't be good enough. That Ruby will see through me. That you'll regret this. Caleb gently wiped the tear away with his thumb. Do you want to be here? Truly? Yes. Then you're good enough. The rest we'll figure out together. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "Together," she repeated. "Together," Caleb confirmed. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched vast and dark, full of stars and silence. Inside the cabin, by firelight, a man and a woman who'd never met face to face before today made promises without words, promises to fight, to survive, to become the family they'd both been searching for. Mara fell asleep again shortly after, but it was real sleep this time, healing sleep. Caleb kept watch through the night, tending the fire, checking her breathing, making sure her fever didn't spike again. As dawn approached and the first pale light began to seep through the cabin's single window, Caleb finally allowed himself to believe they might actually survive this. Not just survive. They might actually build the life Mara had written about in her letters. A life of intention and purpose and choice. He looked at her sleeping face, still marked by ordeal, but also showing hints of the woman she must have been before the crash. Determined, intelligent, brave beyond measure. "Welcome to Wyoming, Mara Ellington," he whispered. "It gets better from here, I promise." Outside, a mourning dove called its lonely song, and a new day began. The morning sun found them still in the cabin, Caleb dozing in the chair he'd pulled beside Mara's makeshift bed, his head tipped back against the rough wall. He jerked awake at the sound of her stirring, instantly alert despite having slept maybe 2 hours total. "Easy," he said, moving to her side as she tried to shift position. "Don't move too fast, your legs." "I know." Her voice was stronger than the night before, though still raw. "I can feel them. Or rather, I can feel what's wrong with them." Caleb studied her face in the early light. The fever flush had faded somewhat, leaving her pale beneath the sunburn. Her dark hair was a tangled mess, and there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of pain she wasn't voicing, but those storm-gray eyes were clear and focused. "How bad is the pain?" he asked. "Considerable." She managed a weak smile. "But I've had worse." "You've broken both legs before?" "No, but I once had scarlet fever as a child. This seems preferable to that particular hell." Caleb found himself almost smiling despite everything. There was a dry humor in her tone that her letters had only hinted at. "I need to set the bones properly and splint them. It's going to hurt." "I assumed as much." She took a breath. "Do you have whiskey for the pain?" "I have some in my saddlebag. Not much, but enough." "Then I suppose we should proceed before I lose my nerve entirely." Caleb retrieved the whiskey and helped her drink a generous amount. She coughed, sputtered, and grimaced. "That's dreadful." "It's not meant to be enjoyed, just effective." Mission accomplished on both counts. She lay back and he saw her hands grip the edge of the bed frame. "Tell me about the ranch while you work. Distract me." So Caleb talked while he examined her legs more thoroughly in the better light. The left leg was indeed worse. A compound fracture of the tibia, bone visible through torn skin that he'd need to clean thoroughly to prevent infection. The right leg was a simpler break, but still serious. He'd need straight branches for splints, cloth for binding, and more of that willow bark tea to help with inflammation. "The ranch sits in a valley where Cottonwood Creek runs year-round," he said, working as gently as he could while still being thorough. "Even in drought years, we've got water. The house faces east, so you get sunrise through those windows I mentioned. Ruby's room is on the north side, stays cooler in summer. There's a garden plot Sarah started that I've kept up, though I'm no farmer. Mostly vegetables. Some herbs." Mara gasped when he touched a particularly tender spot, but nodded for him to continue both the story and the examination. "The barn's solid. Built it the second year, right after the house. Lost some cattle that first winter because I didn't have proper shelter for them. Learned that lesson hard." He paused, assessing what he'd need. "I have to go outside and find some straight branches. Will you be all right for a few minutes?" "I'll endeavor not to run away." That dry humor again. Caleb felt something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with the growing heat of the day. "I'll be quick." He found suitable branches near the creek that fed the cabin's well, 2 sets of reasonably straight willow shoots that would serve as splints. He stripped them of bark and leaves, then returned to find Mara awake and watching the door. "I thought perhaps you'd reconsidered," she said quietly. "Decided that a broken bride wasn't worth the trouble." Caleb knelt beside the bed and met her eyes directly. I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear it. You are not trouble. You are not a burden. You are a woman who survived something that would have killed most men. You made it 3 days in conditions that have claimed the lives of experienced frontiersmen. That makes you tougher than half the ranch hands I've ever hired. So no, Mara, I haven't reconsidered, and I won't. She blinked rapidly, and he realized she was fighting tears. I've never been tough. I've always been the bookish one, the careful one, the one who thought too much and acted too little. Then you've been underestimating yourself. He tore strips from his spare shirt to use as binding. Being tough isn't about being loud or reckless. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. You did that. You're doing it now. I am terrified, she whispered. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. It's people who aren't afraid that get themselves killed out here. He positioned the first splint against her right leg, the simpler break. This is going to hurt. Are you ready? She gripped the bed frame again, knuckles white. No, but do it anyway. Setting the bone required pressure and precise movement, pulling the leg straight while feeling for the alignment of broken ends. Mara made a sound halfway between a gasp and a scream, biting it off quickly, but Caleb heard it and it cut him. He worked as fast as he dared, getting the bone aligned, then securing the splint firmly with the cloth strips. One down, he said quietly. The left is going to be worse. I have to clean it first. I understand. Her voice shook despite her obvious effort to control it. Infection would kill me as surely as the desert. It won't kill you. I won't let it. She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what this was, what they were becoming to each other without having planned it. Not the polite courtship of letters, not the formal arrangement of a mail-order marriage, but something forged in crisis and survival, more binding because of it. Caleb cleaned the wound with boiled water and what was left of his whiskey, trying to be thorough without causing more damage than necessary. Mara's breathing went ragged, quick and shallow, but she didn't cry out. When he finally began setting the bone, though, she did scream, a short, sharp sound that she cut off by biting her own hand hard enough to leave marks. I'm sorry, Caleb said, working quickly now. I'm so damn sorry, Mara. Not your fault, she gasped out between breaths. Just finish. He did, securing the second splint and binding it firmly. When he finally stepped back, his hands were shaking and sweat dripped down his face despite the morning coolness still lingering in the cabin. Mara lay very still, breathing hard, tears streaming down her temples into her hair. Is it done? It's done. The worst is over. I should hope so. I'd hate to think it gets worse from here. Caleb surprised himself by laughing, a short, exhausted bark of sound. You're going to fit right in out here? Wyoming doesn't suffer whiners. Noted. She closed her eyes, exhausted by pain. Will I really walk again, or were you simply being kind last night? You'll walk. It'll take months, probably. You'll need to be patient. Let the bones heal properly. But yes, you'll walk. Months, she repeated softly. That's a long time to be helpless. You won't be helpless. You'll be healing. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment, then opened her eyes again. Caleb, I need to tell you something, before we go any further, before you take me to meet Ruby. He heard the seriousness in her tone and sat in the chair, giving her his full attention. All right. I wasn't entirely truthful in my letters. Not dishonest, exactly, but not complete truth either. Caleb's gut tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. I'm listening. I told you my father was a school teacher. That was true. I told you my mother died when I was 14. Also true. What I didn't tell you was that my father remarried 3 years ago to a woman who had very specific ideas about what her stepdaughter should become. My younger sister Lily, she accommodated. Became exactly what Mrs. Eleanor Ellington wanted, mannered, proper, quiet. But I couldn't or wouldn't, I'm not sure which. She paused, gathering strength or courage or both. There was a man in St. Louis, Theodore Grimsby, son of my father's patron, a wealthy man who funded the school. Theodore was persistent in his attentions. When I declined his proposal, twice, he became less pleasant about it, started making implications about my character. about my suitability as a teacher, about my father's position at the school. He tried to force you into marriage, Caleb said flatly. Not in so many words, but yes. The pressure was considerable. My stepmother sided with him naturally. She saw it as an excellent match. My father... Mara's voice went quiet. My father said nothing, did nothing. And that's when I knew I had to leave. Because if I stayed, eventually the pressure would wear me down, or Theodore would manufacture some scandal that would destroy not just my reputation, but my father's livelihood. So I saw your advertisement, and I answered it. She met Caleb's eyes directly. I'm not running from scandal. I haven't done anything shameful. But I'm running from a man who wouldn't take no for an answer, and a society that would have forced me to marry him anyway. If that makes me unsuitable, if that changes your opinion of me, I'd rather know now. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke carefully. Out here, Mara, a person's past matters a hell of a lot less than who they are in the present. Nobody in Red Hollow knows you came from St. Louis unless you tell them. Nobody knows about Theodore Grimsby unless you want them to. And speaking personally, he held her gaze. Any man who tries to force a woman into anything deserves to be horsewhipped. You didn't run from him. You chose a different life. There's a difference, and it's one I respect. Relief flooded her face so obviously that Caleb realized she'd been genuinely afraid he'd reject her. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic decency, but I appreciate you telling me. He stood, moving to check the water supply. We need to get you stronger before we attempt the ride back to Red Hollow. Another day at least, maybe 2. Can you eat something? I can try. He made a thin soup from the jerky and some wild onions, adding a handful of oats he'd brought in his saddlebag. It wasn't much, but it was hot and nourishing. Mara managed half a bowl before exhaustion claimed her again. Caleb spent the rest of the morning making the cabin more livable, cleaning, organizing supplies, checking the integrity of the roof and walls. Around noon, he shot a rabbit that had been foolish enough to come near the cabin. By evening, Mara was awake again and strong enough to sit partially upright while he changed the bandages on her wounded leg. Tell me about Sarah, she said as he worked. Ruby's mother, your wife. Caleb's hand stilled for just a moment. What do you want to know? Whatever you're willing to tell. I don't want to replace her, Caleb. I know I can't. But I need to understand who she was. For Ruby's sake, if nothing else. He finished rewrapping the bandage before answering. Sarah was a force of nature, small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a will that could bend steel. She was a rancher's daughter from Montana, knew horses and cattle better than most men I've met. When we married, she was 19 and I was 22. We had 7 good years together before Ruby came. His voice went quieter. Sarah knew something was wrong from the beginning of the pregnancy. She could feel it. The midwife said everything was fine, but Sarah knew. She made me promise that if it came down to a choice, I'd save the baby. I tried to tell her it wouldn't come to that, but she made me swear anyway. Mara's hand found his, squeezed gently. Labor went on for 2 days, Caleb continued. Sarah fought so hard, but in the end, her body just gave out. She held Ruby once, just once, long enough to look at her and smile. Then she looked at me and said, "Take care of our girl." And she was gone. Silence filled the cabin. Somewhere outside a bird called. She sounds remarkable, Mara said softly. She was. And Ruby deserves to know about her. I've told her some things, but she was just a baby. She doesn't remember. Then we'll tell her together. We'll make sure Sarah stays alive in Ruby's heart. Mara's fingers tightened on his hand. I meant what I said in my letters, Caleb. I'm not looking to erase the past. I'm looking to build on it. But something in Caleb's chest loosened, a knot he hadn't fully realized was there. I think Sarah would have liked you. She always respected people who said what they meant and meant what they said. Then I hope to honor her memory by being that person for Ruby. They spent the rest of the evening talking, real talking, the kind that letters could only approximate. Mara told him about her years teaching, about the children who'd touched her heart, about the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn in a young face. Caleb told her about the early years of ranching, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons learned through trial and error, and sometimes sheer luck. As night fell and the temperature dropped, Caleb built up the fire and made more of the willow bark tea. Mara's fever had stayed down, and her color was improving. The broken legs would take time, but infection didn't seem to be setting in. "Caleb," she said, as the fire crackled and shadows danced on the walls, "what happens when we get back to Red Hollow? Do we proceed with the marriage? Or do we wait until I can walk down whatever aisle exists out here?" He considered the question carefully. "What do you want to do?" "I asked you first." "That's not an answer, Mara." She smiled faintly. "No, I suppose it isn't." She looked at the fire for a long moment. "In my letters, I thought I knew what I wanted. A practical arrangement. A partnership based on mutual need and respect. But now, after these past 2 days, I find myself wanting more. Or perhaps differently. Not romance necessarily, though I wouldn't object to that eventually, but a real choice. Made freely by two people who know exactly what they're choosing. And what are we choosing? Each other. Despite the circumstances, despite the chaos, despite the fact that I can't even stand up. She looked at him directly. "I choose you, Caleb Rourke. And I choose Ruby. And I choose this life, broken legs and all. But I need to know that you're choosing me too. Not just accepting me because I showed up, or because you feel obligated, but actually choosing me." Caleb moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed frame carefully to avoid jostling her legs. "I watched you lie there, barely breathing yesterday morning, and I realized something. I'd read your letters so many times that your voice was in my head. Your thoughts, your way of seeing things. And the idea of never actually hearing that voice, never having those conversations in person, never watching you and Ruby together, it made the world feel emptier than it's felt since Sarah died." He took her hand, feeling the calluses on her fingers from years of holding chalk and pens. "I choose you, Mara. I chose you when I wrote back that first time. I chose you when I sent money for your passage. I chose you when I rode 20 miles through the night to find you. And I'm choosing you now. Every day from here forward, I'm choosing you." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Then I suppose we're engaged. Properly engaged. Not just arranged, but chosen." "I suppose we are." "Caleb?" "Yes?" "Would you kiss me?" "I realize we're not married yet, and perhaps it's forward of me, but I'd like to be kissed by the man I'm going to marry. Just once. To make it real." Caleb leaned forward slowly, giving her time to change her mind. But she didn't pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle, careful of her injuries and exhaustion. But it was also real and true and full of the promise they'd just made to each other. When they separated, Mara was blushing. "Well, that was worth surviving for." Caleb laughed, surprised by the joy that bubbled up despite everything. "Was it everything you hoped?" "It was better. It was real." She settled back against the rough wood of the bed frame. "When we get back to Red Hollow, how long will it take to arrange a proper wedding?" "Proper by whose standards? We've got a minister who comes through once a month. Judge Henry can perform marriages anytime, or we can wait and do something bigger if you want." "I think," Mara said slowly, "that I'd like something simple. Your daughter, the minimum legal requirement, and the man I love. That's enough." "The man you love?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. She met his eyes steadily. "Too soon?" "Maybe. But I don't think that makes it less true." "No," she agreed softly. "I don't think it does." They fell into comfortable silence then, listening to the fire and the night sounds outside. Caleb found himself thinking about the future, not with the anxiety he'd felt for years, but with something approaching hope. Ruby would have a mother. The ranch would have a woman's touch again, and he would have Mara with her quiet strength and unexpected humor and determination that matched his own. The next morning brought challenges of a different sort. Mara needed to handle certain necessities, and her immobility made everything complicated and embarrassing. But they worked through it with as much dignity as possible, Caleb stepping outside whenever he could to give her privacy, Mara maintaining her composure even when the situation was mortifying. "If we can survive this," she said at one particularly awkward moment, "we can probably survive anything marriage throws at us." "That's the spirit," Caleb agreed, trying not to laugh. By afternoon, he judged her strong enough to attempt the journey back. It would be slow and painful, but staying in the cabin indefinitely wasn't an option. Ruby needed to know what had happened. The town needed to know Mara was alive, and Mara needed better medical care than he could provide with boiled water and willow bark. He fashioned a travois, 2 long poles with canvas stretched between them that Buck could drag. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than trying to ride. Mara bore the preparation without complaint, though he could see pain tightening the corners of her mouth. "Ready?" he asked when everything was secured. "As I'll ever be." "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not giving up, for finding me, for choosing me. Thank you for surviving long enough to be found." He mounted Buck, checking the travois attachment one more time. "Let's go home, Mara. Ruby's waiting." The journey back to Red Hollow took 6 hours, moving at a crawl to minimize the jarring. Caleb stopped frequently to check on Mara, give her water, make sure the splints hadn't shifted. Each time she assured him she was fine, though her face grew paler and the lines of pain deeper. They reached the outskirts of town as the sun was setting, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and amber. People came out to stare. Word had spread about the accident, and the sight of Caleb Rourke returning with a woman on a travois was news. But Caleb didn't stop in town. He headed straight for his ranch, for home, where Ruby waited, where their new life would begin. Sam Weaver's wife Mary must have seen them coming because she had Ruby ready on the porch. The little girl's eyes went wide when she saw the travois, and she started to run forward before Mary caught her arm. "Careful, sweetheart," Caleb called out. "Miss Mara's hurt her legs. She can't jump around yet." Ruby approached slowly, her eyes fixed on Mara's face. She stopped a few feet away, suddenly shy. Mara smiled despite her exhaustion and pain. "Hello, Ruby. I've been looking forward to meeting you for such a long time." "You're the lady from the letters," Ruby said softly. "I am. I'm sorry I'm arriving in such an undignified fashion. I had planned to make a much better first impression." Ruby stepped closer, examining Mara with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "Pa said you got hurt real bad, but you're here now. That's what matters." Something in Mara's expression crumbled just for a second before she got it under control. "Yes, I'm here now." Ruby looked at her father. "Is she staying, Pa? For real?" Caleb dismounted and lifted Ruby up, holding her close. "If she'll have us. Both of us. Would that be all right with you?" Ruby studied Mara again, this time with an intensity that seemed far too old for 6 years. Then she nodded slowly. "I think she's brave. Anyone who gets hurt that bad and still smiles must be brave, and brave people should stay." "Then it's settled," Mara said quietly. "I'm staying." Mary helped them get Mara inside and settled in the bedroom, Caleb's room, since it was on the ground floor. Doc Harrison arrived within the hour, summoned by someone who'd seen them pass through town. He examined Mara's legs, his weathered face expressionless. "You set these?" he asked Caleb. "Best I could." "Not bad. Not bad at all. The left one's concerning. That wound could still turn bad. But if it doesn't, she should heal up fine. Months, though, maybe 6 before she's walking steady." "I understand," Mara said from the bed. Doc Harrison looked at her with something like respect. "You're a tough one. Most folks wouldn't have made it 3 days out there." "So I've been told." Mara glanced at Caleb. "I'm beginning to believe it might be true." After Doc Harrison left, Mary took Ruby to her house for the night, giving Caleb and Mara space to settle. Caleb helped Mara with another dose of willow bark tea, then sat beside the bed as darkness fell outside. "This is your room," Mara said. "Where will you sleep?" "Ruby's room has 2 beds. I'll take the spare one." "Caleb," she caught his hand, "we're getting married. Soon, I hope. This is going to be our room. Our bed. You don't have to exile yourself. You need rest. You need space to heal. I need to feel like this is real, like I'm not just some charity case you're accommodating." Her gray eyes held his. "Please, stay. We don't have to do anything except sleep, but I want to know you're here." So Caleb stayed, lying carefully on top of the blankets while Mara slept beneath them. He listened to her breathing even out, watched her face relax into genuine rest. And somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, He finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to make this work. The mail-order bride had arrived, battered and broken, but alive. And together, they would build something worth surviving for. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the promise of morning. Morning came with the sound of Ruby's bare feet padding down the hallway. Caleb woke instantly, years of light sleeping ingrained from raising a child alone. He'd moved to the chair sometime in the night, giving Mara the bed entirely, and now his neck protested the awkward angle he'd slept at. Ruby appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, clutching her rag doll. She looked at Mara sleeping in the bed, then at her father, her expression serious and considering. "Is she really staying?" Ruby whispered. Caleb stood carefully, joints popping, and guided Ruby back into the hallway so they wouldn't wake Mara. "Yes, baby girl, she's really staying." "And you're going to marry her, like you and Mama were married?" "That's right." Ruby was quiet for a moment, her small fingers working at a loose thread on her doll's dress. "Will she want me to call her Mama?" The question hit Caleb harder than he'd expected. "I don't know. That's something you and Mara will have to figure out together. But Ruby, listen to me." He knelt down so they were eye level. "Nobody's trying to replace your mama. Sarah was your mother, and nothing changes that. But Mara wants to love you too. Is that all right?" Ruby nodded slowly. "I think so. She has kind eyes. Even when she was hurting yesterday, her eyes were kind." "They are, aren't they? Pa, will her legs really get better?" "Doc Harrison says yes, but it'll take a long time. She won't be able to walk or do much for months." Ruby processed this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Then I guess we'll have to take care of her, the way she's supposed to take care of us." Caleb pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling that familiar ache in his chest that came from loving someone so much it hurt. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm 6, Ruby said matter-of-factly. "That's pretty old." From the bedroom, they heard Mara stirring. Ruby pulled back from the hug. "Can I take her breakfast? I know how to make porridge. Mary taught me." "I think she'd like that very much." They moved to the kitchen, and Caleb watched as Ruby carefully measured oats and water, stirring the pot with determined concentration. She was wearing her serious face, the one that appeared when she was trying very hard to do something important correctly. When the porridge was ready, Ruby insisted on carrying it herself, walking with exaggerated care so as not to spill. Caleb followed behind, ready to catch the bowl if needed, but Ruby made it to the bedroom without incident. Mara was awake, propped up on pillows Caleb had arranged the night before. Her hair was still a mess, and there were deep shadows under her eyes, but she smiled when she saw Ruby in the doorway. "Good morning," Mara said softly. "I made you breakfast," Ruby announced. "It's porridge. Pa says you need to eat to get strong again." "That's very thoughtful of you. Thank you, Ruby." Ruby approached this bed carefully, setting the bowl on the small table Caleb had pulled over. Then she just stood there, staring at Mara with open curiosity. "You can ask questions," Mara said gently. "I don't mind." "Do your legs hurt very much?" "Yes, quite a lot, but not as much as yesterday." "Pa says you dragged yourself a really long way after the wagon crashed, that you didn't give up even though you were hurt." "I didn't want to give up. I had made a promise to come here, and I wanted to keep it." Ruby tilted her head. "Because of Pa?" "Because of both of you. I wanted to meet you very much, Ruby. Your father wrote about you in his letters, and I thought you sounded like someone I'd like to know." "What did he say about me?" Caleb started to intervene, but Mara caught his eye and gave a slight shake of her head. She wanted to handle this herself. "He said you're smart and curious, that you ask questions about everything, that you love birds and can name every type that comes to the ranch, that you sing made-up songs while you do chores, and that they make him smile even on hard days." Mara's voice was warm. "He also said you're brave, and that you've been very patient waiting for me to arrive." Ruby considered this. "I have been patient, but I was starting to think maybe you changed your mind." "I didn't change my mind. The wagon just had other ideas." A small smile tugged at Ruby's mouth. "Wagons can be stupid sometimes." "Ruby," Caleb said warningly, but he was fighting his own smile. "It's all right," Mara said. "In this case, I agree entirely. That particular wagon was exceptionally stupid." Ruby's smile widened and something in the room shifted, a small barrier coming down. "Do you really know about birds? Or did Pa make that part up to make me seem interesting?" "I know some things. My mother used to take me on nature walks when I was young. She had a book about birds of North America that I loved. Do you have a favorite?" "Meadowlarks," Ruby said immediately. "They have the prettiest song, and they're brave too. They'll dive at hawks that get too close to their nests." "Brave indeed. I had no idea meadowlarks were so fierce." "Most people don't know. They think larks are just pretty singers, but they're warriors when they need to be." Mara's eyes met Caleb's over Ruby's head, and he saw understanding there. Ruby was talking about more than birds. "I brought you books," Mara said. "They're in my trunk, which I assume is somewhere in this house if it survived the crash." "It survived," Caleb confirmed. "It's in the front room. Got banged up, but intact." Ruby's eyes lit up. "Real books? New ones? Treasure Island and Alice in Wonderland? Have you read either?" "No, we only have Pa's cattle ledgers and Mama's Bible and one book about Wyoming history that's mostly boring." "Ruby," Caleb said again, but with less conviction. "It is mostly boring, Pa, except the parts about Indian battles. Those are exciting." Mara laughed, a real laugh despite her obvious discomfort. "Well, perhaps we can read the new books together once I'm feeling a bit stronger. Would you like that?" Ruby nodded enthusiastically. Then, with the sudden shift of childhood attention, she said, "I should go get dressed. Mary's going to wonder where I am." She started for the door, then turned back. "Miss Mara, I'm glad you didn't die in the desert." "I'm glad too, Ruby. Very glad." After Ruby left, Caleb brought Mara water and checked her bandages while she ate the porridge Ruby had made. The swelling in her legs had gone down slightly, and the wound on her left leg looked no worse than the day before. Small victories. "She's wonderful," Mara said quietly. "Everything you wrote? And more. She likes you. That's not always guaranteed with Ruby. She's careful with new people. But she has reason to be. She's lost her mother. She's learned that people can disappear." Mara set down the spoon, her porridge only half eaten. "Caleb, we need to talk about the practical realities here. I can't walk. I can barely move. I'm going to be a burden for months, not a help. We've been through this. No, listen, please." She met his eyes. "I know what you said at the cabin, and I believe you meant it, but that was in the moment when everything was dramatic and heightened. Now we're here, in your home, and you're going to have to care for me like an invalid. You're going to have to help me with things that are humiliating for both of us. Ruby's going to see that her new mother is helpless. The town is going to talk." "Let them talk. It's not that simple, and you know it. In a small town, reputation matters. Yours and Ruby's and now mine. If we're not careful, this situation could become, what, scandalous?" Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. "Mara, you're worried about the wrong things. Yes, people will talk. They always do. But you know what they'll say? They'll say Caleb Rourke's mail-order bride survived a wagon crash that should have killed her, and he brought her home anyway. They'll say she must be tough as nails. They'll say he must really want to marry her if he's willing to nurse her through recovery. None of that's bad." "You're oversimplifying." "Maybe, but I've lived here for 15 years. I know these people. They respect strength and commitment. You've already shown both." Mara looked away, blinking rapidly. "I've never been this helpless in my life. I've always been capable, independent. Now I can't even walk to the privy without assistance." "For now, not forever." Caleb took her hand. "And you're still capable and independent. Your legs are broken, not your mind, not your spirit. You're still the woman who wrote those letters, who taught children, who made the choice to come here. None of that's changed. Everything's changed. Not the important things." They sat in silence for a moment, the morning light slanting through the window warming the room. Outside they could hear Ruby talking to Mary, their voices carrying through the open windows. "When do you want to do the wedding?" Mara asked finally. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow? Next week? Next month? Tomorrow seems ambitious given my current state. Then next week. Judge Henry comes through on Thursdays. We could do it here in this room if you want. Keep it small." Mara turned back to him, searching his face. "You really mean it? You want to marry me, broken legs and all?" "I really mean it. Why? And please don't tell me it's because Ruby needs a mother or because you gave your word. I need to know the real reason." Caleb thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, layered with grief and hope and fear and something that might be growing into love, though it was too soon to call it that with certainty. "I'm 37 years old," he said finally. "I've lived alone, more or less, for 6 years since Sarah died. I've gotten used to it. The silence, the routine, the safety of not having to open myself up to another person. When I placed that advertisement, I told myself it was just practical. Ruby needed a mother. The ranch needed help. Simple equation." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But then your letters started coming. And they weren't what I expected. You didn't write about wanting adventure or romance. You wrote about purpose and intention and building something that mattered. You asked real questions about Ruby, not just surface things. You told me hard truths about yourself. And somewhere in those letters, I started to feel something I hadn't felt since Sarah. Like maybe the world wasn't quite so empty after all." Mara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "When I found you in the desert," Caleb continued, "half dead and still fighting, still holding on, I realized I didn't just want a mother for Ruby or help on the ranch. I wanted you. This specific, stubborn, brave woman who refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. So yes, Mara, I want to marry you. Broken legs don't change that." A tear slipped down Mara's cheek. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Of failing Ruby. Of failing you. Of being a burden instead of a partner. Then we'll be terrified together." He wiped the tear away gently. "Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." "Caleb Rourke, you're far too kind for your own good. I've been called many things. Kind isn't usually one of them." Mara laughed through her tears. "Then perhaps I bring it out in you." "Perhaps you do." The next few days fell into a pattern. Caleb tended to Mara's needs in the morning, changed her bandages, helped her with necessities that they both pretended were less mortifying than they actually were. Ruby visited constantly, bringing flowers she'd picked, asking endless questions, gradually growing more comfortable. In the afternoons, when Mara was strongest, she began reading to Ruby from Treasure Island, and Caleb would listen from the doorway, watching his daughter's face light up with the adventure. But it wasn't all smooth. Pain kept Mara awake at nights, and Caleb would hear her trying to stifle groans so as not to wake him. The wound on her left leg looked angry and inflamed despite his careful cleaning, and he worried about infection taking hold. And there were moments when Mara's spirits would crash, when she'd turn her face to the wall and refuse to talk, overwhelmed by helplessness and pain. On the 4th day, Sam Weaver and his wife Mary came to visit, bringing food and well wishes. Other neighbors followed. The Hendersons, who'd been in the wagon crash with Mara and had made it to safety. Mrs. Chen from the general store. Even old Hoskins from the depot. But not everyone who came had kindness in mind. On the 5th day, 3 women from town arrived together. Mrs. Gertrude Vale, wife of the bank manager. Mrs. Patricia Summers, whose husband owned the largest spread in the county. And Miss Constance Hart, the schoolteacher who'd held her position for 20 years and guarded it jealously. Caleb met them on the porch, Ruby at his side. "Mr. Rourke," Mrs. Vale said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we've come to welcome your fiancé and to offer our assistance in this difficult time." There was something in her tone that put Caleb's back up immediately. "That's kind of you. Mara's resting at the moment." "Oh, we wouldn't dream of disturbing her rest," Mrs. Summers cut in. "We simply thought, given the circumstances, you might need guidance on how to proceed appropriately." "Appropriately," Caleb repeated flatly. "Well, yes." Miss Hart stepped forward, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "It's highly irregular, Mr. Rourke, an unmarried woman living in your home. Even given her injuries, people will talk. They are talking. Let them." "But think of Ruby," Mrs. Vale said, putting a hand on Ruby's shoulder. Ruby immediately stepped away from the touch. "A child needs to be raised in a proper environment, with proper examples." Caleb felt his temper rising, but before he could respond, a voice came from inside the house. "I may be bedridden, but I'm not deaf." The women turned to see Mara in the doorway to the bedroom, leaning heavily on the doorframe. She must have dragged herself there, and the effort had clearly cost her. Her face was pale and sweat beaded on her forehead, but her expression was composed and her voice was steady. "If you have concerns about my presence in this house," Mara continued, "then address them to me directly, not to Caleb. Not in front of his daughter." Mrs. Vale recovered first, arranging her face into a smile. "Miss Ellington, we're simply trying to help." "Are you?" "Because it sounds rather more like judgment disguised as assistance." Mara's gray eyes were cool. "Let me clarify the situation for you. I am Caleb's fiancée. We will be married as soon as arrangements can be made. My injuries have complicated timing, but not intention. If that troubles your sense of propriety, I suggest you take it up with the universe that arranged for the wagon crash, not with the man who saved my life." "Now see here," Mrs. Summers began. "No, you see here." Mara's voice sharpened. "I spent 3 days dying in the desert because a wheel broke at the wrong moment. I have 2 broken legs that will take months to heal. I am in constant pain, and frankly, I have neither the energy nor the inclination to care what the ladies of Red Hollow think of my living arrangements. If you've come to help, then help. If you've come to gossip and judge, then the door is right there." Silence fell on the porch. Ruby's eyes were huge. Caleb was fighting a smile. Miss Hart drew herself up indignantly. "Well, I can see we're not wanted here. Come, ladies, we clearly made a mistake thinking our assistance would be welcome." "Clearly," Mara agreed pleasantly. The 3 women swept off the porch and down the path to their buggy with as much dignity as they could muster. When they were gone, Mara's composure crumbled. She swayed, and Caleb was at her side instantly, catching her before she fell. "That was incredibly stupid," he said, but there was admiration in his voice. "You shouldn't be on your feet at all." "I know, but I couldn't let them talk about you that way. About us." She leaned heavily against him. "Was I too harsh?" "You were perfect." He lifted her carefully, carrying her back to the bed. "Though you probably just made enemies of the 3 biggest gossips in town. Then I'll have to live with that." Mara settled back against the pillows with a grimace. "I won't let people imply there's anything improper happening here. I won't let Ruby hear that kind of talk." Ruby appeared in the doorway, her eyes shining. "That was amazing. You made them go away." "I may have been a bit rude," Mara admitted. "They were rude first," Ruby declared. "You were just honest." "From the mouths of babes," Caleb murmured. But despite Mara's brave stand, the women's visit left a shadow. That evening, after Ruby was asleep, Mara brought it up again. "They're right, you know, about people talking. I told you I don't care, but I do. Not for myself, for Ruby." Mara's voice was quiet but firm. "She's young enough that she doesn't fully understand yet what people are implying. But she will. And when she does, she'll hear that her father took in a stranger and lived unmarried under one roof. She'll hear that I was improper, that we were improper. Then we'll get married sooner, this week. I'm bedridden, Caleb. I can barely sit up without help. How is that a proper wedding? Who decides what's proper? Judge Henry can marry us right here in this room. Ruby can be there. That's all we need." Mara was quiet for a long moment. "You'd really do that? Marry me now, like this, when I can't even stand?" "I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd have me." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and something in her expression made Caleb's heart beat faster. "Then ask me. Properly. The way it should be asked." Caleb moved to kneel beside the bed, taking her hand in his. "Mara Ellington, you're the bravest, stubbornest, most extraordinary woman I've ever met. You've survived things that would break most people. You've chosen me and Ruby when you had every reason to run. Will you marry me? Not because it's practical or proper, but because I want to spend my life with you. Because I want to see who we become together. Will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Mara's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, Caleb Rourke, I'll marry you. Tomorrow, next week. Whenever you can arrange it, yes." He leaned forward and kissed her, tasting salt from her tears and something sweet underneath. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "Thursday," Caleb said. "Judge Henry comes through on Thursday. We'll do it then." 4 days? I can manage 4 days. Can you? I dragged myself through the desert with 2 broken legs. I can certainly survive 4 more days of gossip and disapproval, Caleb laughed. That's my girl. Your girl, Mara repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Thursday arrived with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, the kind that promised a rare summer rain. Judge Henry arrived at noon in his dusty buggy, accompanied by his clerk who would serve as witness. Sam and Mary Weaver came as well, at Caleb's invitation, and Doc Harrison stopped by to check on Mara before the ceremony. Well, Doc said after examining her legs, the swelling's gone down considerably. The wound's healing clean, no infection. You're a lucky woman, Miss Ellington. I prefer to think I'm stubborn rather than lucky, Mara replied. That too. Doc packed up his bag. You'll do fine. Both of you will. Ruby helped Mara get ready, brushing out her dark hair and braiding it simply. Someone, Mary, probably, had brought a dress in soft blue cotton that fit reasonably well. It wasn't a wedding dress, not really, but it was clean and pretty, and that was enough. Caleb wore his best shirt, the one he saved for town meetings and the occasional funeral. He'd shaved carefully, and Ruby had informed him solemnly that he looked very handsome, Pa. When everyone was gathered in the bedroom, Judge Henry at the foot of the bed, Ruby standing beside Mara, Mary and Sam, and Doc Harrison filling the small space, Caleb took Mara's hand and the ceremony began. Judge Henry kept it short and simple, the words familiar and worn smooth with use. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. But despite the brevity, despite the unconventional setting, despite everything that had gone wrong to bring them to this moment, something profound was happening. 2 people who'd known each other only through letters and a handful of days were binding their lives together, choosing each other deliberately in front of witnesses. Do you, Caleb Michael Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Mara Catherine Ellington, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Mara's voice rang clear. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Henry smiled. You may kiss your bride, Caleb. Caleb leaned down, mindful of Mara's injuries, and kissed her gently. When they pulled apart, Ruby was beaming, Mary was wiping tears, and Sam was grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd seen all year. Congratulations, Mrs. Rourke, Caleb said softly. Mrs. Rourke, Mara repeated, testing the name. I rather like that. Ruby climbed carefully onto the bed, and Mara wrapped an arm around her. Welcome to our family, Ruby said seriously. Thank you for having me, Mara replied, just as seriously. They celebrated with a simple meal that Mary had prepared. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from someone's garden. It wasn't fancy, but it was good, and it was shared with people who genuinely cared. As evening fell and the gathering broke up, Judge Henry pulled Caleb aside. That's a remarkable woman you've married. I know. The town's going to test her, test both of you. People like the Vales and the Summers don't give up their disapproval easily. We'll manage. I believe you will. Judge Henry clapped him on the shoulder. But don't underestimate how hard it might get. Mara's going to be housebound for months. She's going to need support that goes beyond medical care. Make sure she has friends. Make sure she doesn't feel isolated. I will. After everyone left, Caleb helped Ruby prepare for bed. She was quieter than usual, processing the day's events in her thoughtful way. Pa, she said as he tucked her in, is Mara really my mother now? What do you think? I think, Ruby frowned, considering. I think she wants to be, but I don't know if I'm ready to call her that yet. That's all right, baby girl. These things take time. There's no rush. But I do like her. A lot. I'm glad. Ruby was quiet for a moment. Do you think Mama would be okay with this? With Mara? The question hit Caleb hard, as it always did when Ruby asked about Sarah. I think your mama would want us to be happy, to have family, to not be alone, and I think she'd like Mara very much. Me too, Ruby whispered. Then, Pa, I'm glad Mara didn't die in the desert. I'm really, really glad. So am I, sweetheart. So am I. When Caleb returned to his room, their room now, He found Mara still awake, looking out the window at the storm clouds that had been threatening all day. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall, pattering against the glass. "Rain," she said quietly. "In the desert." It happens sometimes, not often, but when it does, it's a gift. He sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling, honestly?" "Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified, happy." She turned to him. "Married." "Married," he confirmed. "Caleb, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If this gets too hard, if I become too much of a burden, if you regret—" He stopped her with a kiss, deeper than the gentle one at the ceremony. When he pulled back, his voice was firm. "I'm not going to regret this. I'm not going to regret you. We're married now, Mara. For better or worse. We made that promise in front of witnesses. I intend to keep it. Even when I'm difficult? Especially when you're difficult." She smiled through fresh tears. "I'm going to hold you to that. Please do." Outside, the rain began in earnest, drumming on the roof, soaking into the parched earth. Inside, a family, newly formed, unconventional, still finding its shape, settled into the first night of their new life together. There would be challenges ahead, gossip and judgment and the long road of Mara's recovery. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And that was enough. The rain continued through the night, steady and soft, a sound that usually brought comfort. But Mara couldn't sleep. Pain kept her hovering in that miserable space between wakefulness and rest, and her mind wouldn't quiet despite her exhaustion. She was married now, truly married, to a man she'd known in person for less than a week, to a child who was trying so hard to be brave about accepting a stranger as family. What had she done? Beside the bed, Caleb sat in the chair where he'd been spending his nights, his breathing deep and even. She could make out his profile in the darkness, strong jaw, weathered features, the kind of face that spoke of hard work and harder choices. He'd kept every promise so far. Found her when she was dying, nursed her through fever and pain, married her despite the scandal it would cause. But promises made in crisis and promises kept through ordinary days were different beasts entirely. As if sensing her wakefulness, Caleb stirred. "Can't sleep?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He moved to sit on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her legs. "Pain?" "Some. But mostly just—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain the tangle of thoughts in her head. "Thinking too much?" Despite everything, she smiled. "How did you know?" "Because I'm doing the same thing." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Having second thoughts?" "No, yes, maybe." She squeezed his hand. "Not about you, not about Ruby, just about whether I can actually do this. Be what you both need." "What do you think we need?" "I don't know. That's the problem. I know what the letters said, what I thought I could be, but the reality is so much more complicated than words on paper." She could feel tears threatening again, which was ridiculous. She'd cried more in the past week than in the past year. "I'm supposed to be a mother to Ruby, a wife to you, a help on the ranch, but I can't even walk to the kitchen. I can't cook, I can't clean, I can't do anything except lie here being useless." "You're not— Please don't tell me I'm not useless. I know you're trying to be kind, but I need honesty right now more than kindness." Her voice cracked slightly. "I need to know what happens when the crisis is over and we're just left with ordinary life. When you're exhausted from doing everything yourself, and Ruby realizes her new mother can't even play outside with her, and the whole town is whispering about the crippled mail-order bride who trapped Caleb Rourke into marriage. What happens then?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The rain drummed against the roof, filling the silence between them. "You want honesty?" he said finally. "All right, here it is. I'm scared too. I'm scared that I won't know how to be a husband again after 6 years alone. I'm scared that I'll fail you somehow, say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and you'll realize you made a mistake coming here. I'm scared that Ruby will resent you for not being Sarah, or worse, that she'll love you and then something will happen and she'll lose another mother. I'm scared that this whole fragile thing we're building will shatter the first time real trouble hits." Mara stared at him, shocked by the raw admission. "But here's the other truth," Caleb continued. "I'm more scared of not trying. of letting fear win, of teaching Ruby that you should only take safe bets in life. You're right that ordinary days are different from crisis, but ordinary days are also where real life happens, where real love gets built. Not in the dramatic moments, but in the small ones. The breakfast conversations and the evening routines and the 1,000 tiny choices to show up for each other. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. So yes, there will be hard days ahead. Days when you're frustrated with your limitations, and I'm exhausted from carrying extra load. Days when Ruby acts out because change is hard for children. Days when the town gossips and we question everything. But I'd rather face those days with you than face easy days alone. Does that make sense? It does, Mara whispered. It makes perfect sense. Good. Now try to sleep. Tomorrow Ruby wants to help you start a garden journal. She's very excited about it. A garden journal? She figures if you can't work in the garden yet, you can help her plan what to plant next spring, draw pictures, make notes about what grows well here, keep her company while she weeds. Something warm bloomed in Mara's chest. She thought of that herself? She did. She's a smart one, our girl. Our girl. The possessive sent a shiver through Mara. Ruby was theirs now. Legally. Officially. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but underneath the fear, there was also joy. Caleb? Thank you for being honest with me, for not pretending everything's perfect. We're going to have to be honest with each other if this is going to work. No sense starting with pretty lies. No sense at all, she agreed. This time, when sleep finally came for Mara, it was deeper and more restful than any she'd had since the accident. Morning brought Ruby bursting into the room with her usual energy, carrying a slate board and chalk. You're awake. Good. I drew the garden plot and marked where everything is now, see? She held up the slate, which showed a surprisingly detailed sketch. That's where the tomatoes are, and that's the squash, and those are the beans climbing on poles. Mara pulled herself more upright, ignoring the protest from her legs. This is wonderful, Ruby. You're quite the artist. Pa says I get it from Mama. She used to draw birds. Ruby climbed carefully onto the foot of the bed, settling cross-legged. So I was thinking, next spring we could try corn, and maybe some flowers too, not just vegetables. Mama always said a garden should have flowers. Your mother was right. Flowers feed the soul. Ruby's face brightened at hearing Mara agree with something Sarah had said. That's what she used to say. Flowers feed the soul. Pa doesn't remember her saying that, but I do. Then we'll definitely plant flowers. What kind should we try? They spent the next hour discussing possibilities, Ruby chattering excitedly while Mara made notes on paper Caleb brought. Sunflowers for height and cheerfulness, zinnias for color, morning glories to climb the porch posts. Ruby had opinions about everything, and Mara found herself genuinely enjoying the planning despite the constant ache in her legs. When Caleb called Ruby for breakfast, the girl hesitated. Can I bring mine in here to eat with Mara? I think that would be lovely, Mara said before Caleb could answer. So Ruby brought her plate of eggs and biscuits and sat on the floor beside the bed, still talking between bites about the garden, about a hawk she'd seen yesterday, about how Mary Weaver's daughter had a new kitten and could they maybe get one too. Caleb watched from the doorway, something soft in his expression that made Mara's heart squeeze. This was what he'd wanted when he'd placed that advertisement. Not romance, not grand gestures, just this. A woman talking with his daughter about gardens and dreams while morning sun streamed through the window. The peaceful moment shattered when someone knocked hard on the front door. Caleb's expression shifted immediately to wariness. Stay here, he told them, moving to answer it. Mara heard voices in the front room, raised and agitated, a woman's voice sharp with distress. Then Caleb calling, Mara, I need you to hear this. Ruby's eyes went wide. Mara looked at the girl. Help me to the doorway? Together they managed it, Ruby supporting Mara's weight on one side while Mara hopped on her good leg, clinging to furniture with her free hand. By the time they reached the bedroom door, Mara was sweating and dizzy, but she could see into the front room where a young woman stood wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Chen, Caleb was saying, slow down. Tell me again what happened. It's my husband, the woman sobbed. He went to check the fence line this morning. His horse came back without him. I found him at Willow Springs. He's hurt bad, Mr. Rourke. Fell off his horse. Hit his head. I tried to wake him, but I can't, and I don't know what to do. And Doc Harrison's gone to Buffalo Creek for 2 days. And I'm so scared. All right, Mrs. Chen. Let me get my horse. I'll go with you right now. But what if he dies before we get back? What if I did something wrong moving him to shade? What if... Mrs. Chen. Mara's voice cut through the panic. All eyes turned to her, leaning heavily in the doorway with Ruby propping her up. Listen to me. Did your husband have any bleeding from his head? Any blood in his ears or nose? Mrs. Chen blinked, thrown by the question. No, I don't think so. Just a lump on his forehead. Is he breathing steadily? Not gasping or irregular? Steadily, yes. Just, he won't wake up. That's good. That means his skull probably isn't fractured badly. The not waking up is concerning, but if you got him to shade and his breathing is steady, you bought him time. Mara's mind was racing, pulling up information from the medical books her mother had loved. Caleb, you need to check his pupils when you get there. If one is much larger than the other, that's bad. Means pressure on the brain. If they're the same size and responding to light, that's better. Caleb stared at her. How do you know this? My mother wanted to be a nurse before she married. She had medical texts. I read them. Mara turned back to Mrs. Chen. Keep him still. Don't move him more than necessary. Don't try to pour water down his throat if he's unconscious. He could choke. Just keep him cool and wait for him to wake naturally. And Mrs. Chen, people wake up from head injuries all the time. Try not to panic. Mrs. Chen was nodding frantically. Thank you, Mrs. Rourke. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. You did exactly right coming for help. Now go with Caleb. He'll take care of everything. After they left, Ruby helped Mara back to bed. Mara collapsed against the pillows, her remaining strength spent. Well, that was foolish. I probably looked ridiculous hopping around. You looked brave, Ruby said seriously. And smart. Mrs. Chen was really scared until you talked to her. I hope I gave her good advice. I'm not a doctor. I just remembered things from books. Books are important. Knowledge is important. That's what Mrs. Chen needed, someone who knew things. Ruby climbed up beside Mara carefully. Can you teach me? About medical things? If you'd like to learn, I'd be happy to teach you, though I hope we don't have many more opportunities to practice. They spent the rest of the morning quietly. Ruby brought Treasure Island and asked Mara to read aloud, and they lost themselves in pirates and adventure while waiting for Caleb to return. He came back near noon, looking tired but relieved. Chen's going to be fine. Woke up about an hour after I got there. Confused and nauseous, but awake. Your advice was good, Mara. The pupils were equal. No fracture that I could see. Thank God. Mrs. Chen wanted me to thank you again. She said... He paused, a strange expression crossing his face. She said she's going to tell everyone in town how the new Mrs. Rourke saved her husband's life with her doctoring knowledge. Mara's stomach sank. I didn't save anyone. I just remembered some things from a book. It doesn't matter. That's the story she's telling. And in a town this size, by tomorrow everyone will know about it. Is that a problem? Caleb sat heavily in his chair. I don't know. Could go either way. Either people will respect you for it, or they'll say you were showing off, acting above your station. The Vales and their crowd won't like it. The Vales and their crowd can... Mara caught herself, glancing at Ruby. Can think whatever they like. But you don't want them thinking badly of you, Caleb said gently. Nobody wants that. No, Mara admitted. I don't. But I couldn't just stand there and do nothing while Mrs. Chen was falling apart with fear. I know, and I'm proud of you for helping. He reached over and squeezed her hand. Just be prepared. The town's going to have opinions. They always do. The opinions came faster than expected. By evening, Sam Weaver stopped by with news that Mrs. Chen had indeed been talking up Mara's knowledge all over town. By the next morning, 2 different women showed up asking Mara's advice about various ailments. One with a persistent cough, another worried about her pregnant daughter. Mara did her best to help, offering suggestions cautiously, always prefacing with, I'm not a doctor, but each person who came left satisfied, and the word spread further. On the 3rd day after the Chen incident, Mrs. Gertrude Vale appeared on the doorstep. Caleb answered the door with obvious reluctance. Mrs. Vale, what can I do for you? I'd like to speak with your wife, if I may, alone. Caleb's expression hardened. Whatever you have to say to Mara can be said with me present. Please, Mr. Rourke. I'm not here to cause trouble. I simply wish to speak with her privately, woman to woman. Something in her tone made Caleb hesitate. He looked back at Mara, questioning. Mara nodded slightly. She could handle Gertrude Vale. I'll be in the next room, Caleb said pointedly. If you need me, just call. After he left, Mrs. Vale approached the bed slowly, her usual imperious bearing slightly diminished. She looked older up close, tired around the eyes. Mrs. Rourke, she began formally, I owe you an apology. Mara blinked, caught completely off guard. I beg your pardon? When I came here before with Mrs. Summers and Miss Hart, I was cruel, judgmental. I implied impropriety where there was none, and I did it in front of your stepdaughter. That was wrong of me. Thank you for saying so. Mrs. Vale sat uninvited in the chair beside the bed. The truth is, I was jealous. Is that pathetic? A woman my age jealous of a mail-order bride? I don't understand. My husband and I have been married 32 years. We have no children. I lost 3 babies before they were born, and after the last one, the doctor said there would be no more. Martin, my husband, he says it doesn't matter, that I'm enough. But I see how he looks at other men's children, the longing he tries to hide. Her voice cracked slightly. And here you come, younger, capable, about to become a mother to Ruby, building the family I always wanted. I hated you for it. Mara didn't know what to say. This brutal honesty from a woman who'd been so cutting days earlier left her speechless. But then Clara Chen came into the general store yesterday, crying tears of relief because her husband was alive and awake, and it was all because you'd known what to tell her. And I realized something. Mrs. Vale met Mara's eyes directly. You're not here to take anything from anyone. You're here to build something, to help. And I was too bitter to see it. Mrs. Vale, Gertrude, please. If I'm going to bare my soul, we might as well use first names. Gertrude, then. I appreciate your honesty, truly, but I'm not some paragon. I'm just a woman trying to figure out how to be a wife and mother when I can barely move. Most days I feel like I'm failing at everything. But you keep trying anyway. That's what matters. Gertrude reached into her bag and pulled out a small book. This was my mother's. She was a midwife back in Pennsylvania. It's her journal, remedies, notes on childbirth, things she learned over 40 years of practice. I thought, if you're going to be the person people come to with medical questions, you might find it useful. Mara took the book with trembling hands. The leather cover was worn soft, the pages yellowed. Inside, cramped handwriting detailed everything from poultices for inflammation to signs of difficult labor. It was a treasure. This is too precious. I can't. You can. You will. Gertrude stood. Consider it a peace offering, and perhaps the beginning of a friendship, if you'll have me, despite my terrible first impression. I'd like that very much. After Gertrude left, Caleb came back in looking thoroughly confused. What just happened? I think I just made an ally. Mara held up the journal, and inherited some knowledge that might actually be useful. Huh. Caleb shook his head. This town. Just when I think I understand it, it surprises me. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. People came to Mara with questions. Nothing serious. Doc Harrison was still the authority for real medical issues. But small things. A child's rash, a sprained ankle, a persistent headache. Mara offered what knowledge she had, always carefully, always with disclaimers. But she helped where she could. And slowly, imperceptibly, the town's opinion began to shift. The whispers changed from mail-order bride who trapped him to that Rourke woman who knows doctoring. Not everyone was convinced. Mrs. Summers and Miss Hart still maintained their disapproval. But enough people respected Mara's knowledge and willingness to help that it mattered. Ruby noticed the change too. People like you now, she announced one afternoon while they worked on the garden journal together. Jenny Weaver told me her ma says you're the smartest woman in Red Hollow. That's very kind of Mrs. Weaver. Are you the smartest woman in Red Hollow? I doubt it. I just read more books than most people. Ruby considered this. I want to read lots of books too, so I can be smart like you. You're already smart, Ruby, but reading will make you even smarter. Good. Ruby drew a careful sunflower in the journal. Mara, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you miss St. Louis, your old life? The question caught Mara off guard. She thought about it honestly before answering. I miss my sister sometimes, and I miss having 2 working legs. But no, I don't miss St. Louis. Not really. Do you know why? Why? Because in St. Louis, I was becoming someone I didn't like very much. Someone small and afraid. Someone who let other people make her choices. Here, even lying in this bed, I feel more like myself than I have in years. Ruby nodded slowly. I'm glad you came here, even though the wagon crashed, even though you got hurt. So am I, sweetheart. So am I. But not everything was smooth progress. Mara's legs healed slowly, and some days the pain was so intense she could barely think. There were nights when she woke Caleb with her crying, nights when she was short-tempered with Ruby, days when the walls of the bedroom felt like a prison. The worst day came 6 weeks after the wedding. Mara woke to find that the wound on her left leg had reopened slightly during the night, blood soaking through the bandages. The sight of it, the setback after weeks of slow progress, broke something inside her. It's never going to heal, she said flatly when Caleb came to check on her. I'm going to be like this forever. It's just a small setback. Doc Harrison said, I don't care what Doc Harrison said. I'm so tired, Caleb, so tired of being helpless, of having to ask for help with everything, of being a burden. You're not, don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't tell me I'm not a burden. We both know I am. You can't work the ranch properly because you're always here tending to me. Ruby can't have a normal childhood because her new mother is bedridden. I can't even consummate our marriage because my legs are broken. How is that not a burden? The words hung in the air, brutal and raw. Ruby, standing in the doorway with breakfast, heard everything. Her face crumpled. Ruby, Mara started, but the girl was already running, the plate clattering to the floor. I'll go, Caleb said quietly. He left Mara alone with her pain and her shame. She could hear him in Ruby's room, his voice low and comforting. Ruby's sobs. More talking. Eventually, silence. When Caleb returned, his expression was carefully neutral. She'll be all right. She's young. She doesn't really understand what you meant about consummating. She just knows you're unhappy and she thinks it's her fault somehow. God. Mara covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for her to hear. I didn't mean any of it. Didn't you? Caleb sat down, and for the first time since she'd known him, he sounded tired, truly tired. Mara, I know this is hard. I know you're in pain and frustrated and scared, but you can't take it out on us. Ruby's just a child, and I'm doing the best I can. I know you are. Tears streamed down Mara's face. I don't know what's wrong with me. Some days I'm fine, and then days like today I just break. And I say terrible things I don't mean. Then tell Ruby that. Tell her you were hurting and scared and you said something you didn't mean. She'll forgive you. Children are good at forgiveness. What about you? Do you forgive me? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. I'm not angry, just worried. Worried that you're giving up, that the woman who dragged herself through the desert is letting pain win. Maybe she should. Maybe pain deserves to win sometimes. No, Caleb's voice was firm. Pain doesn't get to win. Not in this house. Not while I'm still standing. He moved to the bed, took her hands in his. Listen to me. You are not a burden. You are my wife. You are Ruby's mother. You're valuable and wanted and needed. Not despite your limitations, but as a complete person who happens to have broken legs right now. Do you understand? I'm trying to. Try harder, because Ruby needs you to be strong, and so do I. Mara nodded, wiping her eyes. I need to apologize to her. Yes, you do. Ruby came back into the room slowly, cautiously. Her eyes were red, but she'd stopped crying. Mara held out her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, Ruby came to the bed. I'm sorry, Mara said, holding the girl close. I said something very unkind. I was hurting and tired, but that's no excuse. You are not a burden. You are a joy, the best part of every day. Do you believe me? Ruby nodded against Mara's shoulder. Are you going to leave? When your legs get better? What? No. Ruby, no. Why would you think that? Because you sounded sad, like you didn't want to be here anymore. Mara's heart shattered. She pulled back so she could look Ruby in the eyes. I am sad sometimes, and frustrated, but never because of you or your father, only because of my injuries. And even on my saddest days, I want to be here. I want to be your mother. I chose this family, Ruby, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. Ruby studied her face, looking for lies, then finally relaxed. Okay, I believe you. After Ruby left to do her chores, Mara lay back exhausted. Caleb remained beside the bed, watching her. That was hard, he said finally. It was necessary. I scared her. You scared both of us a little. I'm sorry. I know. He paused. Mara, I think you need to talk to someone. Mary, maybe, or Gertrude. Someone who understands what it's like to feel trapped by circumstances. What good would talking do? Maybe none. Maybe a lot. But keeping everything inside until it explodes isn't working. His voice gentled. I can't fix this for you. I can set your bones and bring you food and help you move around, but I can't fix what's happening in here. He touched her forehead gently. You have to do that work yourself, but you don't have to do it alone. Mara caught his hand, held it against her cheek. How did you get so wise? 6 years of single parenthood teaches you things. I'll talk to Mary. Or Gertrude. Someone. Good. He stood. I need to check the fence line. Will you be all right for a few hours? I'll manage. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you. For not giving up on me even when I'm giving up on myself. That's what marriage means. We take turns being strong. He smiled slightly. Today it's my turn. Tomorrow it might be yours. After he left, Mara lay in the quiet room and tried to find that strength he seemed so sure she possessed. The woman who'd survived the desert felt very far away right now. But maybe that was all right. Maybe strength wasn't about never breaking down. Maybe it was about breaking down and then finding the will to piece yourself back together, again and again, as many times as it took. Outside the window, she could hear Ruby singing one of her made-up songs while she weeded the garden. The words were nonsense, but the melody was sweet. Mara closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, a reminder of what she was fighting for. Not just to walk again, but to be present for this life she'd chosen. To be the mother Ruby deserved, to be the wife Caleb needed, to be the woman she'd promised herself she would become. It wouldn't be easy. Some days, like today, it would be nearly impossible. But she would keep trying, because the alternative, giving up, letting pain win, meant losing everything that mattered. And she hadn't survived the desert just to surrender now. The conversation with Mary Weaver came 2 days later, when the woman stopped by with fresh bread and an offer that felt like providence. I heard you had a rough morning the other day, Mary said, settling into the chair beside Mara's bed with the ease of someone comfortable in their own skin. Ruby told my Jenny that you were sad. Mara's cheeks flushed. I shouldn't have let her see me like that. Why not? You think children don't know when adults are hurting? Mary shook her head. My Jenny's seen me cry plenty of times. Over babies I lost, over hard winters, over my father passing. Didn't damage her none. Maybe even taught her something about being human. I told her I was a burden, that I couldn't even... Mara stopped, the words too embarrassing to repeat. That you couldn't be a proper wife to Caleb? Mary finished bluntly. Honey, if you think a marriage is only about what happens in a bed, you've got a lot to learn. My Sam and I went nearly a year after our second was born before we could be intimate again. Women's bodies need time to heal, so do broken bones, I imagine. The casual way Mary discussed it made something loosen in Mara's chest. Did you feel useless during that time? Every single day. I'd watch Sam working himself to exhaustion while I could barely climb the stairs without hurting. I'd see other women at church, standing and socializing, while I had to sit because standing too long made me bleed. It was hell, Mara, pure hell. Mary leaned forward. But you know what I learned? My worth wasn't tied to what my body could do. It was tied to who I was. The mother who read to my children, the wife who listened to my husband's worries, the woman who still had thoughts and feelings and value even when she couldn't do all the physical things expected of her. How did you stop feeling like a burden? I didn't, not completely. Some days I still feel it. Mary's honesty was refreshing. But I started looking for ways I could contribute that didn't require a working body. I taught Jenny her letters when she was barely 3. I mended every piece of clothing in the house, even one-handed. I planned menus that would stretch our food supplies. Small things, but they mattered. Mara thought about the garden journal, about the medical advice she'd been giving, about the afternoon spent reading to Ruby. Small things. But maybe they did matter. I'm scared, Mara admitted. Scared that when my legs finally heal, Caleb will realize he married someone he doesn't really know. That the crisis brought us together, but ordinary life will tear us apart. Could happen, Mary said pragmatically. Marriage is a gamble, however you start it. But I've seen the way that man looks at you, Mara. Like you're water in the desert. Like you're the answer to something he didn't even know he was asking. That's not crisis talking. That's real. How can you be sure? Because I've seen him look at other women over the years since Sarah died. Kind looks, appreciative looks, but never that look. The one that says, this person matters in a way I can't quite explain. You have that look too when you watch him with Ruby. Mary stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. Stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and start living the life you've got. That's my advice for what it's worth. After Mary left, Mara found herself thinking about those words. Start living the life you've got. What did that look like when you were confined to a bed? The answer came gradually over the next few weeks. She started teaching Ruby not just from books, but from her own knowledge, arithmetic in the mornings, geography in the afternoons, history through stories that made the past come alive. Ruby absorbed it all hungrily, her quick mind latching onto concepts and connections. She helped Caleb with ranch bookkeeping, something he'd been handling haphazardly in ledgers that made her accountant's heart weep. She reorganized his records, created a system for tracking expenses and income, even identified places where he was losing money through poor planning. You're better at this than I am, Caleb admitted one evening, looking over the neat columns she'd created. I've been running this ranch by gut feeling for 15 years. Gut feeling has its place, but numbers don't lie. She pointed to a column. You're spending too much on feed in winter because you're not preserving enough hay in summer. If you added another cutting in August, you'd save nearly $30 come January. $30. Caleb whistled low. That's not nothing. It's a new dress for Ruby, or medicine if someone gets sick, or a dozen other things. Mara felt a small surge of satisfaction. See? I can contribute even from this bed. But Caleb leaned down and kissed her, quick and warm. I never doubted it. But the real test came 10 weeks after the wedding, when Ruby ran into the house crying, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. I fell, she sobbed. From the hayloft. I'm sorry, Pa. I know I'm not supposed to climb up there alone, but I wanted to see the baby swallows, and I slipped. Let me see. Mara's voice cut through the panic with practiced calm. Caleb, bring her here. Quickly. She examined the wound with steady hands despite her racing heart. It was deep, still bleeding freely, but not deep enough to see bone. Head wounds bleed a lot, she told Ruby, whose sobs had quieted to hiccups. It looks worse than it is, but we need to clean it and probably stitch it. Caleb, do we have silk thread and needle? Sarah's sewing kit. I'll get it. Boil water first and bring clean cloth. Mara kept pressure on the wound while speaking calmly to Ruby. This is going to hurt, sweetheart. I won't lie to you, but I need you to be brave. Can you do that? Ruby nodded, her face pale but determined. Will I have a scar? Probably a small one, right at your hairline. You can tell people you got it fighting a dragon. Despite everything, Ruby giggled wetly. There aren't any dragons in Wyoming. Then we'll say you were very brave during a medical procedure. That's just as impressive. Caleb returned with supplies, his face drawn with worry. Mara walked him through preparing everything, then positioned Ruby so the light fell directly on the wound. Hold her shoulders, Mara instructed. She needs to stay very still. Ruby, look at your father. Don't look at what I'm doing. Just tell him about the baby swallows. What did they look like? While Ruby described the birds in a trembling voice, Mara cleaned the wound thoroughly, then threaded the needle with hands that were remarkably steady. She'd never done this before, only read about it in Gertrude's mother's journal and medical texts. But the mechanics were clear in her mind. The first stitch made Ruby cry out. Caleb's grip on her shoulders tightened. "You're doing so well," Mara murmured, working quickly. "Just 3 more. Keep talking about the swallows. Were they blue?" "The blue on top, white underneath. They were, ow, they were flying in and out of the nest, bringing bugs for the babies." "How many babies?" 4, small and fluffy. Ruby gasped as Mara tied off the final stitch. "Is it done?" "All done. You were incredibly brave." Mara finished bandaging the wound, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the crisis was over. "You'll need to keep this clean and dry for about a week. No climbing in haylofts." "I won't, I promise." Ruby touched the bandage gingerly. "Thank you, Mara." Not Miss Mara, not Mrs. Rourke, just Mara. Simple and trusting and intimate. After Caleb took Ruby to rest, he returned to the bedroom and sank into his chair, running his hands through his hair. That was terrifying. "For me too." Mara's hands were still trembling. "I've never stitched human skin before, only practiced on orange peels the way the book described." "Orange peels?" Caleb stared at her. "You learned to suture from practicing on fruit?" "I told you I read a lot." "Reading is one thing, doing it perfectly on your daughter while she's bleeding and crying is another." He moved to sit on the bed, taking her shaking hands in his. "You saved us today. If Doc Harrison had been here, he'd have done the same thing you did, but he wasn't. You were." "I was so scared I'd hurt her, that I'd do it wrong." "But you didn't. You stayed calm and did what needed to be done." He raised her hands to his lips, kissed each palm. "That's who you are, Mara. The person who stays calm in crisis, who dragged herself through the desert, who stitches wounds from a bed because her legs won't carry her. You're the strongest person I know." Mara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on most days." "That's what strength is. Barely holding on but refusing to let go." Caleb brushed the tears away with his thumb. "I love you. I don't know if it's too soon to say that or if I should have said it sooner, but I love you. Not because you're convenient or helpful or good with Ruby, though you're all those things, but because you're you, stubborn and brave and smart and kind and completely unable to give up even when you want to." "I love you too." The words tumbled out, undeniable. "I think I have since you found me in the desert, but I was too scared to admit it. Too afraid you'd think it was just gratitude or crisis bonding or—" He kissed her, cutting off the anxious spiral of words. When they pulled apart, he was smiling. "We really did this backwards, didn't we? Married first, fell in love later. Completely backwards, but I wouldn't change it." "Neither would I." That evening, while Mara was reading in bed, Ruby appeared in the doorway looking uncertain. "Mara, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." Ruby came closer, fidgeting with her nightgown. "Would it be all right if I called you Mama? Not all the time if you don't want, but sometimes, because you feel like a mama to me now. The way you took care of my head today, and the way you read to me, and the way you make Pa smile." The words came out in a rush. "But I know you're not my real mama, so if you'd rather I didn't—" "Ruby," Mara's voice was thick with emotion, "I would be honored, so honored. If you want to call me Mama, you absolutely can. Even though I already had a mama? Even though you're allowed to have 2 mamas, one who gave you life and loved you first, and one who gets to love you now." Mara held out her arms. "Come here." Ruby climbed onto the bed carefully, mindful of Mara's legs, and burrowed into her embrace. "Mama," she whispered, testing the word. "My mama." "My daughter," Mara whispered back, and felt something settle into place, something she'd been missing without knowing it. Purpose, belonging, family. The breakthrough in Mara's healing came 3 months after the wedding, on a crisp October morning. She woke to find she could flex her left ankle without the sharp, breath-stealing pain that had accompanied every movement. She tried again, carefully. Still, there was discomfort, but not agony. Caleb? She shook his shoulder. He'd taken to sleeping beside her rather than in the chair, both of them learning to navigate the intimacy of shared space even without consummation. Caleb, wake up! What's wrong? He was alert instantly, years of single parenthood making him a light sleeper. Nothing's wrong. Look! She moved her ankle again, then her toes. The swelling's finally gone down. I can move it. He sat up, examining her leg with careful hands. The bone had knit solidly, the wound long since healed to an angry pink scar. Doc Harrison said it would be at least 4 months before you could try walking. We shouldn't rush it. I know, but this is progress. Real progress. She couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. What if I could stand by Christmas? What if I could take steps by spring? Then we'll be there for every wobbling attempt. He kissed her forehead. Don't push too hard. I don't want you re-injuring yourself. But Mara was already planning. Exercises she'd read about. Ways to strengthen the muscles that had atrophied during months of bed rest. Small goals that would add up to the larger goal of walking again. Doc Harrison came to check on her progress 2 days later, and his examination was thorough. Remarkable, he said finally. The bones have healed cleanly. Better than I expected, honestly. You can start trying to bear weight, but carefully, a few minutes at a time, using a crutch or leaning on furniture. When can I walk without support? Months still. Maybe by spring, like you said. But this is good news, Mara. Real good news. That afternoon, with Caleb on one side and Ruby on the other, Mara stood for the first time in 3 months. Her legs trembled violently, muscles screaming protest, and she couldn't hold it for more than 30 seconds before collapsing back onto the bed. But she'd stood, on her own feet, bearing her own weight. I did it, she gasped, laughing and crying simultaneously. I actually did it. You did, Caleb agreed, his eyes suspiciously bright. You really did. Ruby was bouncing with excitement. Do it again. Stand again. Tomorrow, Mara promised. Tomorrow I'll stand for longer. And she did. Every day she pushed a little further. Standing became walking 3 steps while leaning on Caleb. 3 steps became 5, became 10. By November, she could make it from the bedroom to the kitchen using furniture for support. By December, she could walk outside to the porch, leaning on a crutch but moving under her own power. Ruby made her a crown from winter berries and dried flowers for Christmas, declaring her the Queen of Walking. Caleb gave her a cane he'd carved himself, with intricate birds etched into the wood. For when you don't need the crutch anymore, he explained. But the best gift came on Christmas night, after Ruby had fallen asleep and they were alone in their room. Mara had been walking more steadily all day, and the progress had filled her with a reckless courage. Caleb, she said quietly, I think I'm ready, if you are, to be properly married. He looked at her, understanding dawning. Are you sure? We can wait as long as you need. I'm sure. I want this. I want you. I want us to be complete. What followed was gentle and careful and sweet, both of them nervous as newlyweds should be, learning each other's bodies and rhythms. When it was over, Mara lay in Caleb's arms feeling more whole than she had since the accident, not because of the physical intimacy alone, but because of what it represented. Healing, moving forward, becoming fully themselves together. I love you, Caleb murmured into her hair. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that comes from having something precious you don't want to lose. You won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere. She kissed his chest, right over his heart. I'm home, Caleb. Really, truly home. Spring came early that year, melting the snow by mid-March and coaxing green shoots from the earth. Mara had graduated from cane to walking unaided, though she still limped when tired and probably always would. But she could walk to the garden, could stand at the stove to cook, could run, slowly, awkwardly, but actually run, when Ruby called for her from the yard. The garden they'd planned so carefully during Mara's bedridden months became reality under her hands and Ruby's eager help. Sunflowers climbed toward the sky. Zinnias splashed color across the beds. Morning glories wound up the porch post just as they'd imagined, and in the vegetable patch, corn and beans and squash thrived under their care. "It's perfect," Ruby declared one afternoon, standing amid the flowers with dirt under her fingernails and joy on her face. "Exactly like we planned." "It is, isn't it?" Mara surveyed their work with satisfaction. "Your mother would be proud. You've created something beautiful." "We created it, together." Ruby slipped her hand into Mara's. "Will you tell me about your sister sometime? The one you left in St. Louis?" "Would you like that?" "I would, because she's part of you, and I want to know all your parts." So that evening, sitting on the porch while Caleb worked in the barn and sunset painted the sky gold and pink, Mara told Ruby about Lily, about the sister she'd protected and raised and ultimately left behind, about the guilt she still carried, about the letter she'd written 6 months ago that had never been answered. "Maybe she's angry with me," Mara said softly, "for leaving her. Or maybe she's proud of you," Ruby suggested, "for being brave enough to choose your own life. You're wise beyond your years, you know that? I have a very good teacher." Ruby leaned against Mara's shoulder. "Mama, I'm glad you came here, even though the wagon crashed, even though you got hurt. I'm glad it was you who answered Pa's advertisement." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." The real test of everything they'd built came in late April, when Theodore Grimsby arrived in Red Hollow. Caleb came home mid-morning with a grim expression. "There's a man in town asking about you, well-dressed, from back east. Says his name is Theodore Grimsby, and he's looking for Mara Ellington. Claims to be your fiancée." The blood drained from Mara's face. "That's impossible. I refused his proposal, twice." "He's telling people you ran away, that you owe him an explanation. He's staying at the hotel and making quite a scene about the improper woman who abandoned her responsibilities." Fear clawed at Mara's throat, the old terror she'd felt in St. Louis. But beneath it, something else stirred. Anger. She'd built a life here, a real life, and she'd be damned if Theodore Grimsby would take it from her. "I'm going to town," she said, standing. "Right now. No, he doesn't get to come here and spread lies about me. Not in the town where I live, not where Ruby might hear them." Her voice was steel. "I'm going to face him, and I'm going to end this." Caleb studied her face, then nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." "So is Ruby, if you want her there." "I do. I want him to see what I chose, what I built, the family I have now." They rode into town together, Mara on Buck behind Caleb, Ruby on her pony beside them. Mara's legs ached from the ride, but she ignored it, focused on what needed to be done. Theodore Grimsby stood on the porch of the hotel, exactly as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, well-dressed, confident. When he saw her, his face lit up with false relief. "Mara, thank God, I've been so worried." "Don't." She dismounted, limping slightly, and walked toward him with her head high. "Don't pretend this is about worry. What are you doing here, Theodore?" His expression shifted, calculation replacing concern. "I came to bring you home. Your father is beside himself. Your stepmother is distraught. You left without a word. I left with many words. In a letter I placed on my father's desk. Did he not share it with you?" Theodore's jaw tightened. "A letter saying you were running away to marry a stranger. Hardly a rational decision?" "It was the most rational decision of my life." Mara gestured to Caleb and Ruby, who joined her. "This is my husband, Caleb Rourke, and this is my daughter Ruby. My family." "Your daughter?" Theodore's laugh was ugly. "You've been here, what, 6 months, and you're playing house with a cowboy and his brat?" Caleb stepped forward, his face dark with anger, but Mara put a hand on his arm. "This is my fight." She turned back to Theodore, and her voice carried across the street where people had gathered to watch. "You don't get to come here and insult my family. You don't get to spread lies about me. I never agreed to marry you, Theodore. I refused you. Twice. You couldn't accept that, so you tried to force my hand through manipulation and threats. I left St. Louis to escape that. I answered an advertisement and came to Wyoming to build a life on my own terms." "A life with a stranger? That's madness. Is it?" "Because that stranger rode through the desert to find me when I was dying. He nursed me through fever. He married me when I couldn't walk. He gave me a home and a daughter and a purpose." Her voice rose. "You never asked what I wanted, Theodore. You assumed I'd fall in line because that's what women do in your world. But I didn't. I chose differently, and that choice was mine to make, not yours." Theodore's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Around them, townspeople watched with obvious approval. Mrs. Chen was nodding. Gertrude Vale had tears in her eyes. Even old Hoskins from the depot was grinning. "You'll regret this," Theodore said coldly. "Living in poverty with a rancher, raising his child. You could have had everything in St. Louis." "I have everything here." Mara reached for Caleb's hand, then Ruby's. "Everything that matters, anyway. Go home, Theodore. Tell my father I'm happy. Tell my stepmother I'm exactly where I want to be. And tell yourself whatever story you need to make sense of a woman who dared to say no to you." Theodore stared at her for a long moment, then turned and stalked into the hotel. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause. "That was the most magnificent thing I've ever seen," Gertrude said, appearing at Mara's elbow. "The way you stood up to him, the way you claimed your choices. Magnificent." "I was terrified," Mara admitted, her legs suddenly shaking. "Courage and fear aren't opposites, dear. They're companions." Gertrude squeezed her arm. "You were both terrified and brave. That's the best kind of courage." That evening, back at the ranch, Mara sat on the porch with Caleb while Ruby played with a kitten they'd finally acquired. The confrontation with Theodore had left her drained, but also strangely lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted. "Do you think he'll leave?" she asked. "By morning, if he's smart. He made a fool of himself today, and this town won't tolerate him bothering you again." Caleb pulled her close. "You were incredible, by the way you stood there and told him exactly who you are. Who we are. I couldn't have done it without you beside me, without knowing Ruby was there." She rested her head on his shoulder. "That's the thing, I think. Before, in St. Louis, I was alone. But here I'm not. I have people who choose me back." "You do. You always will." Ruby abandoned her kitten and climbed into Mara's lap, something she still did despite being 7 now and getting tall. "Mama? That man was mean." "He was, but he's gone now." "Good. Because we don't need mean people here. We only need people who love each other." "That's exactly right, sweetheart." As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Mara looked out at the land she'd come to love, the garden she and Ruby had planted, the house Caleb had built with his own hands, the barn where their horses waited, the creek that wound through the valley, sustaining everything. This was home, not because of the place, but because of the people she shared it with. "I need to tell you both something," she said quietly. Ruby straightened in her lap, and Caleb's arm tightened around her shoulders. I'm fairly certain I'm pregnant." Caleb went very still. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without Doc Harrison confirming it. All the signs are there." She touched her stomach gently. "I wanted to wait to tell you until I was certain, but after today, after standing up to Theodore and claiming this life, I don't want to keep secrets, even happy ones." Ruby's eyes went huge. "A baby? I'm going to have a brother or sister? If everything goes well, it's early yet, there's no guarantee." Ruby threw her arms around Mara's neck, squealing. "A baby! Mama, that's the best thing ever!" Caleb hadn't said anything yet. Mara turned to look at him, suddenly worried. "Caleb? Are you all right?" His eyes were wet, his face a mixture of joy and fear. "Sarah died having Ruby. What if—" I know you're scared. I'm scared too." She cupped his face in her hands. "But I'm not Sarah. My body is different, and I'll be careful. We'll be careful. Together." "Together," he repeated, his voice rough. Then he kissed her, deep and desperate and full of everything he couldn't say. When they pulled apart, he was smiling through tears. "A baby. We're having a baby." "We are." That night, after Ruby had finally gone to sleep, still talking excitedly about baby names, Caleb held Mara close in their bed. "I can't believe how much has changed in 10 months, how much we've changed." "We've become who we were meant to be," Mara said softly. I think that's what happens when you stop running from fear and start running towards something better. Is that what you did? Ran toward something better? I did. I ran toward you, toward Ruby, toward this life. She intertwined her fingers with his. Best decision I ever made. Even with the wagon crash, the broken legs, the months of pain, even with all that, because it taught me something important. That strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, about dragging yourself forward even when every part of you wants to quit, about choosing love and family and purpose even when it's terrifying. You dragged yourself through the desert to get here, Caleb murmured, and I found you, barely breathing, but still fighting. You found me twice, Mara corrected, once on the trail when I was dying, and once in my fear when I was ready to run away because the town was whispering and I felt like a burden. She pressed a kiss to his jaw. Thank you for not giving up on me either time. Never. I'll never give up on you. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of spring and growing things. Inside, a family that had been forged in crisis and tempered by hardship slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they'd chosen each other and would keep choosing each other through whatever came next. The mail-order bride had arrived broken and dying, but she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived. She'd become a wife, a mother, a healer, a woman who knew her own worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. And in doing so, she'd helped her cowboy and his daughter heal too, filling the spaces in their hearts that had been empty for so long. In the morning, Ruby would bounce into their room, demanding to help plan the baby's nursery. Caleb would ride out to check the fence line, whistling one of Ruby's made-up songs. And Mara would walk to the garden on legs that still ached sometimes, but carried her forward nonetheless, ready to tend the life they'd planted together. This was what choosing looked like, not the fantasy of perfect love that arrived fully formed, but the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of two people who'd met as strangers, survived impossible circumstances, and built something lasting through sheer determination and daily choice. The wagon had crashed, but they'd risen from the wreckage, and standing together on the ridge behind the ranch, one golden afternoon weeks later, watching the sun set over the land that was now truly theirs, Caleb took Mara's hand and said what they were both thinking. We made it. We did, Mara agreed, her other hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where new life grew. Against all odds, we made it. Ruby ran ahead of them, chasing butterflies through the wildflowers, her laughter carrying on the wind. Below them, the ranch spread out like a promise kept. And in that moment, standing together with their future unfolding before them, Mara knew with absolute certainty that every painful step of the journey had been worth it. She'd been found. She'd chosen to stay. And she'd built a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined in those desperate hours trapped beneath the wagon wreckage. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.